Hello, and thank you for joining me. This is Nick. I'm a senior IT developer for Pronova Technologies. In today's video, we're going to be covering the database backups and restoring backups inside the PNT DB engine. We're going to start off where we left off on the last video. In the last video, we went through installing, licensing, activating the software. With our program open, we're just going to go to the database backup section here. Feel free to read through the information here in regards to the backup. There are two main methods. The first method is the .back file, which is the default configured one. And you can change between the two with the checkbox here. So by using the .back file, we'll go over the pros and cons of both. With the back file, it's going to create, using the service, it's going to create a backup of the database files that are used for the PNT database engine. If we bring up the folder here, we can browse to that directory right here. And right here we'll notice that we got a backups folder. If that backups folder is not there, it launches, it creates the folder once you launch the backups form here. With the backup form launched, we can see that the folder gets created, and we can go in here and configure the backups and how we want them to run. Now for starters, we're going to select the days that we want to run. You always want a good amount of backups. Backups are critical, very crucial. So we're going to select, for this example, we're going to do ours every single day of the week. And we're going to do two times. We're going to say, 6 in the morning. You can also use this here if you need to set that. And we're going to do 2, so 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. You'll notice you can do up to 5 different time frames if you need. One of the perks to using the .back method is if you are a 24-hour operations facility, the .back method does not take the service down to perform the backups, so it won't be non-interfering for your end users. When the backup is running, they'll be able to keep using the PNT ERP system or any other program that utilizes the database engine without interference while the backups are running. The only thing they might notice is the system might be a little sluggish during the backup process, as it's allocating processor and hard drive to performing the backups. But depending on the size of your database files, it could be extremely fast. It could take a little bit of time. But regardless, with the back file, the end users will still be able to use any program connecting to the database engine as needed. One of the other things we see down here is the number of backups to keep. In this case, since we're doing two backups a day, say we want 10 days worth of backups, we'd set this to 20. So it's going to keep a copy for each time it runs a backup, 2 per day. So 2 per day with 20 will give us 10 days worth of backups. For this demonstration purpose, we're going to go ahead and activate a third one here, and we're going to set it to the current time. We're going to go 1 minute ahead just so we can run a backup now, and we're going to go ahead and save. So once our time hits 10:09, we'll see, because we have, today is the Thursday, so we have Thursday checked at 10:09 p.m. So 10:09 just hit. That's going to go ahead with this unchecked here. It's going to create a .back file method, and we'll be able to see that right here in this directory. With our backup ran, we can see the folder created there. Rather than opening the folder though, we're going to go in here and check our log. And we can see that the backup started at this time and ran all 10 database files. Now, if we was at 20 backups, meaning we had 20 of these in there, we'll go ahead and do another one real quick. We're just going to go ahead and create our .mdf file method. And we'll set this to 1010. Like so. We're just going to get this out of the way so we got that file to demonstrate as well. So if we look at that first .back file, we can see we got 10 back files. One for each database file used for the program. If we look at the data folder, this is where all our data is stored, the files and all the database files, along with the logs. So with that backup ran, we can come in here and look at it and see that we have all 10 of them. One of the other perks to the .back file method is the files will be smaller. The MDF file creates a full copy, and we'll cover that one a little bit more once we start talking about it. But the .back file method keeps the files a lot smaller, doesn't take down the service to perform the backup, allowing it to stay up and running if a system needs to back up without interference to the end users. One of the downsides is the .back file has to be applied against the database files, and you could do that with Microsoft, SQL Management Studio, a couple other third-party programs. Our program also offers the restore function for it as well, which we'll cover here shortly. But that's it for our .back files, so we have a good copy of the database there. Now we also set it real quick to run the MDF file method. So we're just going to come back to our log here and refresh. And we can see that when we scheduled that for 10:10, it did run. And it ran a copy of the MDF file, so you could tell here a little bit different results. The MDF backup method, when you check this box here, it does take down the service to perform the backups because it's doing a physical copy of the MDF file, the database, and the logs. So when you run MDF method, it will take down your service, and your end users, if they're currently in the system when this runs, it will stop. They won't be able to connect to the database because the service will be temporarily suspended while it's performing the backup. Depending on the size of your database files as your company grows, this could take a lot longer. Being the default size, fresh start is obviously very quick, but that will change as time goes on. So once again, once we look at the log here, we see the backup started there, completed all 10. Copies were good. It reestablished all the connections, and the TCP listeners all started talking again. So if we refresh one more time, just check for errors, nothing new. If we look at our backup folders, we have our first one we did, which was the back file. But now we have that new folder, which is our MDF method. And again, the MDF method, it copies both the database and the log. One of the downsides, two downsides to this method is obviously it takes the service down, and the files are a lot bigger because it's doing a complete copy of the files themselves. One of the pros to this method, though, is it's a lot easier to restore because now you can literally copy and paste these files from here and just drop them into the data file to overwrite them. In order to do that, you'd have to stop the service, of course, and we'll go into that once we do the restore. But the MDF method allows for a lot easier restore, and you can still use the restore utility if you like, but it's as simple as just copying and pasting once the service is terminated. Now that we have both backups there, say we run into an issue. One of our database files is missing. So if we're looking in here, sorry, wrong one, data, look at the, for example, the DB2 MDF. If that one is missing, we can just come in here to the restore and browse to that location. In this case, we'll focus on the MDF file first. So if our DB2 MDF file was missing, we could just select that. Give us a little bit of information if we want to proceed. Go ahead and restore. This here is going to let us know that any restore process will take down the service during the restore procedure. So if you ever do a file database restore, you'll want to make sure you plan an outage with your end users or programs connecting to this program database. In this case, we're aware of it and we're ready. We're going to go ahead and say yes. With the .mdf file method, it took down the service, ran the restore, restarted the service successfully, and the restore was completed. If we look at the log here, we can scroll down a little bit, and we can see right here that on our last MDF file backup, once the services were all back up and running, you can see that a restore process was started at this time. And you only get these prompts here if you do the restore through the database program. If you copy and paste the files, you won't see this other than the starting and stopping of the services. But we can see that it started there, stopped the service, replaced the file copy complete, restarted the service, This is where we can see the transmitters came back online. And here we get a notification that the PNT DB engine service restarted successfully and the restore completed successfully. Let's go ahead and refresh one more time, make sure there's no errors. And very good. So with that, we have a log indicating our restore is successful. And again, this will take a lot longer if the database files are a lot bigger. So with that method, we just restored from our MDF method. We restored that DB2 file here. Now you can also restore the log files. Log files are a little bit more tricky. The logs have obviously a running log of the database actions, etc., etc. If you want to learn more on that, you can research some Microsoft SQL local database and logging information. So if you want to restore a log with the MDF method, other than manually doing it, which we'll show after this, if you replace a log file, you will have to also restore the MDF file itself. So the log has a running log against it. If you replace just the log, it'll be out of sync with the database file. It seems like you can restore the database file without having to do the log. But if you do restore the log, you will also have to restore the MDF file. I don't think we've had any log changes in this since we started, but we'll give it a shot and see if we can get the error to show, just so you'll know what you'll kind of see there if you don't do both. So in this case, we're going to do the database for log. For example, say it's missing or there's an issue. We're going to go ahead and restore it. Take down the service, we understand. And it was restarted and completed. If we refresh, we can see right here that we're starting to get some errors. Cannot open the database DB4 MDF. So we replaced the DB4 log, but we didn't replace the DB4 MDF file. Until we do that, we will continue to see errors in here as they're now out of sync. So what we want to do is go to Restore Database and make sure you also grab the MDF file if you replace a log. Something to keep in mind if you ever do replace a log, do be ready for replacing the MDF file too. So if there's a lot of data change between your backup and now, you will lose any unbacked up data between now and then. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and replace the MDF4 file so we can bring the system back up without error. Go ahead and click OK. And perfect. So if we refresh here, scroll down, we can see the restore was successful and the transmitter started with no errors in between, like we've seen up here with the error on processing and the failed login. So good note, when you replace the log file, you must also replace the MDF file. And that's how you do it through the system with the MDF method, which is this right here. One of the pros with the MDF method is that we can also just go over here and stop our service. Wait for that to refresh there. Refresh our log. We can see down here that the service is stopped. With that in mind, say we lost a couple of the MDF files, we can actually go back to our backups now, where our MDFs are. We can quite literally just grab all of these. We're going to go ahead and copy and simply paste them into the database file here. We're going to replace all of them, and you can replace individual ones. Again, make sure if you replace a log to also do the MDF file. And right there we just did a full restore from a backup of all the database files in our database engine. If you try to replace a file and you get an error stating that the file is locked, one of the things you'll have to keep an eye out for, even though the service is stopped and does not have the files locked anymore, you might still have a Microsoft SQL right here, this service. If you try to replace a file with the service stopped, but you're getting an error saying the file is in use or unable to delete, you can go ahead and just terminate this process. That won't harm the system at all. In fact, it'll actually just restart once you restart the service. As we can see, the SQL server started back up again. If we refresh our log and scroll down to the bottom, we can see where we stopped it. We copied all the files and replaced them. We didn't necessarily need to do that. Just for demonstration, we terminated the SQL Windows NT 64-bit. And we can see that the transmitters all are active and up and running again. Refresh one more time just to make sure there's no errors. And with that, we did a complete full database restore with the MDF method. So that's one of the nicest parts about using the full file copy function. Makes it super easy to restore physically, manually. And you can still use the single level restore from the restore utility with the program. So one of the big perks to the MDF method. And then these are, of course, complete duplicates of the databases. So one of the downsides is the size will also be equal the size of the file itself, whereas the back file is a lot smaller. For example, if we look at the DB1 MDF, go back here, you can see the DB1 back is significantly smaller. So pros to the back files are smaller. Pros to the MDF files is they're bigger but easier to restore. So both have their pros and cons. You'll want to accurately utilize it, and you can jump between the two. As you've seen, I created both, so as your environment grows, you can swap as needed. If you start off not needing this, you can start with the MDF. If you start finding yourself needing the backups to not interfere with end users, you can simply uncheck that, save it, and now you're back to the back method. So that's how you restore from the MDF method. So the other one we want to review is these back files. Now again, to restore from a back file, it has to process against the database files itself. So you can't just copy these and paste them over. They're different file types. You can use SQL Management Studio or other third-party programs to do it, or you can use the restore function inside here as well. So if we come in here, we select, let's say we have an issue with our, let's go to the right one here. We have an issue with our DB6 back file here. Go ahead and select that and open. Bring up a little information for us here. Go ahead and restore. And once again, the back files, when they're created, they don't interfere with the service. But again, any restores you do will interfere with the service. It will have to take the service down to process the restore. Once we're ready for that, we go ahead and say yes. It's going to schedule, since it's going to use the service to go ahead and run it. If we try to run another one immediately, say number 4, we're going to get a message saying that we can't, as there's already a back file restore waiting to complete. And we'll have to wait for that to complete before we can process another one. And what that does is with the back file, it tells the service, hey, here's a back file we need you to restore. The service is going to go ahead and also terminate this as well. So when using this program, you'll want to make sure it's not on a server that runs SQL for other functions or needs, as this service here could affect other SQL servers installed on this server or computer. So make sure you have a standalone device for this program. If we refresh here, we'll scroll down to the bottom. And right here we can see the last time we had stopped the service and restarted it. This is where we started that restore process for the back file. It'll give us information on which one we did, in this case number 6. And we can see that the con connected with that individual file once the service was stopped. And it went through and processed the back file restoration internally within the service itself. Once the restore of the file is complete, and again this could vary depending on the size of your back files and database, it's going to reestablish all cons, and then everything else will come back up. And then we'll see that a database restore process completed successfully. If we refresh one more time, just to make sure there's no errors, no news is good news. So the services all came back up, and the restore is complete. And that's how you would restore using the DB engine interface for restoring a back file. Again, pros and cons. We'll kind of reiterate one more time here. So MDF method, services taken down during the backup process. So all these 3 times here, the service will be interrupted during the backup process. So with the MDF method, you'll want to run them after hours or when users don't need the system. or plan an outage with your end users to still accommodate for the MDF file backup. One of the other cons is the MDF file backup file size is bigger. And then the pros, it's the actual copy of the files themselves. You can use this method with a third-party program to additionally back these up off-site, and you're all covered on all your database files there. And it's easy to also manually fully restore all database files and logs by just copy and pasting with the service disabled. The pros and cons again for the back file, that's with this unchecked, is the service is not interrupted. Service stays running while the backup files are created. Maybe a little sluggish during the backup process, but end users are still up and operational. And another pro is the file sizes are smaller, really preventing you from using up all your hard drive space. And then the cons are the restore method for them. You can't simply copy and overwrite the database files. You have to apply these backup files against the database files directly. And again, you can just use that with the restore utility. So good options as far as backups go. One other thing you want to include with any offsite backups as well is inside the data folder. There's a files folder here. Any files, images, GIFs, pictures, etc. used for label designing will be stored in this location. So you'll also want to back up these files as well. And you could use something if you're on Windows Server, for example. You could utilize something like Windows Server Backup if you have an external hard drive. Or you can go a little bit more in depth on it by using a third-party backup utility or application appliance, or some other sort of offsite backup. With a third-party backup solution, these files will be locked while the service is running. So in order for any third-party program to back up the MDF files directly, the best practice would be just to define your system's backups here to run first, and then your third-party program can simply come and grab these backups here. That concludes the backup and restoration process for the database engine. Thank you for joining me.